Press B. Get to see your destiny. Shows you all abilities or different skill trees that there are. Right. So you got the trainee farmer that shows you the stuff you'll be able to make from that. Potions, seeds or raise animals, calves. Have the gatherer. So run around and gather the items needed to be able to craft the armor, the weapons, so on. This one they have an axe, which is logs, right? So you be a gatherer and you want to run around and chop trees. You use an axe, right? So this one is the stone hammer. So this one does the rocks. This is the skinning knife, and that's for like the mobs, the animals, the wolves, the leather. They have their pickaxe, which is for the ingots. You know, you have the sickle for the cotton. You have the fishing rod for the fish, and that's basically different roles you can do as gathering. Different types of like material that they have. Basically five different, and then there's tiers to the material. Then you basically, this is like the trainee type thing. You have the journeyman refiner, and this is being able to refine the materials that you get. So, say you run around and you chop some trees and get some logs. Well, you have to refine those to be able to craft with that. You know what I'm saying? And usually, you got to use like the tier before that to refine it. So if you have a three, you choose to be able to refine the three. You know what I'm saying? And that goes for basically all of them. So you have the cotton, different tiers. So this is just regular. Then you have point one, point two, and that goes for all the material. The ore, this is what the ore looks like. Same thing. The just flat four, and then 4.4 basically. You have the leather. Then you have the logs or planks they're called, and then the stone. And this is basically all the different like this is like tier three. So you start off at tier two, you know what I mean? Then you work your way up here. So that it's how it says 0 to 100. You know what I mean? This is how much uh like harvesting you need to get to one, right? So 7,212 just to get to one. You have learning points, which you like need premium and stuff like that to be able to learn that. See, I have 8,031. You know what I mean? So I basically never really use those. And then different tiers. So the blue is tier four, the red is tier five, green is tier six, yellow is tier seven, the white is tier eight. All the gear, all the gathering stuff, all the basically almost anything. It goes from tier two to tier eight. Then it just adds the point one, point two, point. You have like hammers, the demolition hammers. These are for like knocking stuff down, like walls or hideouts or whatever. They have tome crafting for all the things you could craft. This one, so this is like your offhand, right? So a book, an Eye of Secrets, a Muzak, a Taproot, Celestial Sensor thing, and they all do different things. You know what I mean? Like say Taproot, that gives you an extra 200 HP. You know what I mean? This one gives you extra mana. You know what I mean? This one gives you extra mana, but then also reduces your cast time modifier. You know what I mean? So a bunch of different ones basically for that. That's sort of like the mage type one, but this is all just basically crafting. These are the different stuff that you can craft, which is basically all the gear or weapons, and most of the items you. This is like the crafting side of the skill tree, right? So you basically just sort of like start playing and then like basically figure out what you want to craft or be. And it to each their own. Everybody likes to do different, right? So then this is like the journeyman adventure. So it basically just says do activities 9,000 at 9,000 to be able to get to that, right? And then you have to. This is to be able to use the better gear. So you know what I mean. You basically got kind of have to almost do this first, from like the beginning up to the eighth one, just to be able to wear the T8 stuff or the good gear, which they call an Elder Adventurer. And this is like the fighting basically side, right? So half the side will be crafting, the other half is like the fighting, the armor, the weapons, and then just explained all those weapons. This is like the warlock, right? And then they have curse staff, great curse staff, demonic staff, life curse, damnation, shadow call, all different weapons, right? So you basically have seven choices with this one. You could just say you click on it, then click on the weapon that you want to play, and just say and then you sit here and read all the abilities. So the Q, which will be your Q button, right? The W is your W button, the E is your E button. These are passive skills, so these just happen as you play it. And they all basically have different ones. Like, so for this one, a real more common build for it, everybody likes a damnation staff as a catalysm and curses all enemy within a 13-meter radius around targeted position, dealing damages. But it decreases damage resistance by 48. So that's why a lot of people like that. If you're like the cursed mage, right? And you have frost mage. This one is actually pretty good. It's called icicle staff. It's create a blizzard with an 8-meter radius at target position, less than 5 seconds, deals damage, but it slows enemies 50%. So this is more of like a like defensive tank build. You know what I mean? The damnation is more of like a clothy, right? And I'll explain that in deep. And there's also permafrost, which people play, which is ice crystal, which is like a giant little piece of ice that just plops up. It stuns people, does a lot of damage. These are for the builds that I'm basically explaining are more for like multiplayer, not towards like the corrupted or single players, which we could also explain those. Like, these are arcanists, which is like an arcane. You know what I mean? Then you have different ones. They have the great arcane, which a lot of people like. What it like freezes people in place. You have the matic staff, which is like a support role, a protective beam. You know what I mean? And you have the witch work, which black hole like sucks everybody in. You know what I mean? And it's like a clump sort of, but it's also one handed. The occult staff, the time core is like a speed road, so it like boosts everybody's speed. Then you have locust, which is like a big like shield for your allies. You know what I mean? So basically, most of our the arcanes are all played. You know what I mean? It just depends on if you want to play support role, but all those basically are great for support. Then you have the priest, which is the healer. You always need those, right? So most people use the but now this one I like is pretty cool. It's like you like jump up in the air and come flying down. You know what I mean? But most people use this one for like big battles and stuff like that. It's like a giant circle that just heals a ton of HP. That's basically the only one people use for ZVZ. I'm more talking about like ZVZ rolls basically. So then you have the pyromancer, which is the fire, which is brimstone. You drop a huge meteor, does a ton of damage. That's basically the only really ZVZ one for that one. Then now we'll go into like the cloth wear. So this was just like the sort of mage weaponry. Here, and you know what? I'll actually explain all those first. And you have the hunter weaponry, which you have, the quarter staff. You know what I mean? Good one for ZVZ. The soul size that shoots a giant tornado. You have the growl seeker. It's like a double stun in a way. Then dagger. You got the demon fang. It does a ton of damage. These are actually also good. The bridal fury. Then you have the nature staff, which Rampants are pretty good for, CVZs, but then also Blight. A lot of people use the Blight staff. You know what I mean? Wild staff was always pretty, but that's more of like a healer build. So you have two different healer builds. You have nature and then holy. So, just depending on your play style. Then you have the spears. Which, yeah, you probably see the Spirit Hunter the most for ZVZ, honestly. So that'd probably be the best one for that for Z. Then you have the bows. Longbow is always great, does a ton of damage, like a rain of arrows. You know. Then let's go to the sword or hammers. So now you have the hammer fighter. Grove keeper is good. It's ground pound, so like you leap in the air, stun people. W is like an inertia ring, so it's like a huge ring that slows people. The Hodge, hand of justice. Hodge is short for that. You have the onslaught basically. So like you run into a bunch of people and then you press your E and push it backwards towards your allies. It like clumps them all up, brings them all together, and like does a huge little slam thing. It's pretty cool. Outbirds were always decent, but most people use Groundbreaker. You know what I mean? So that's like pretty good for ZVZ. Sometimes people use the bear balls, but not really so much anymore. The Great Axe was always decent for, so there's different ones for that one. Then swords, you have Gallopairs, which is like a massive E, does a ton of fucking damage. The Kingmaker was always pretty majestic smash. And then those are basically the different weapons. So you have swords, bows, and then the mage, like wands. Then we'll get into like the cloth. So cloth is more for or better for like mages and stuff. You know what I mean? You have basically 9 different choices. You click on each one of them. It tells you different things, but I'm sort of showing you like the ZVZ playstyle uh like outfits basically, you know what I mean? So like ZVZ weapons, ZVZ armor. So it, this is pretty good, hyper focus, right? Making all your casts and channels uninterruptible, you know what I mean? Which is great for like uh mage players or clothy players, or say any of the wands that I just showed you, like ice, fire, holy. This is decent for it. But if you're like a sort of like a ZVZ caller, right? You want to use the cleric out, so it's like an ice block. You like turn into a big block of ice, and then you're immune to damage for 4.75. You know what I mean? Which is awesome because as a caller, you sort of got to be in the front. Sometimes you get a little like like mollywopped and stuff, but it's cool. You just bop your cleric out and you're Gucci. You know what I mean? Fiend cows for ganking, but we'll that later because that's also pretty. And so that's the clothy helmets for ZZ Clerical and the face scale. You know what I mean? It's pretty good. I mean, the scholar cal's good for like axes. If you're like sort of right, if you run low on mana, this is always pretty good. The chest piece here we have. I mean, basically, most people run the cleric robe if you're using the wands or the mages. Some people do robe of purity. It's like it like bops people away from you. They just added this, which was pretty cool. This is like the new gear, but for ZVZ, it's basically just cleric robe. But if you're using the fire staff or like frost or whatever, you want to use the scholar robe because it gives you extra speed cast. So when you bop your Qs, they're faster when you pop your R. And you have the boots. So these boots, royal sandals, add damage. So they're good for axes, swords. You know what I mean? It like adds extra damage. And you have the scholar sandals, which are pretty good because then this is what most people use for if they're like clothy. You know what I mean? You get a sprint, and then it also sort of like refreshes your shoes. These are like the new ones, which you know are not bad, but you don't really see a lot of people using these. Then you have the leather hood. Which this is pretty good. So this one just basically makes you immortal, right? So you can't drop below 1 HP. It says. And this one, I mean, I always like this one. Not really much, but these are sort of for like tanks that are holding chokes, right? Smoke bomb, which is a giant puff of smoke that basically like pushes everybody away from it. And you have the Royal Hood, which basically, if you're doing perma, frost, fire, brimstone, know, growing rage. So you basically, use this ability, then you let it stack, then you drop your damage, and it does a ton of damage. For like healers and stuff like that, use Merc Hood for cleanse. So in case you get stunned by a tank or something, you can cleanse it. Assassin Hood is always good because as meditation, so the cooldown rate by 80%. So this is good for whatever you want to use it for, but it basically just reduces your cooldown by 80%. So say if it's a 30-second cooldown, you bop this, it reduces it by 80%. You know what I mean? So, which is actually pretty great, depending on what you're using it for. Most people use it for like the Demon Fang and, sort of like the axes and stuff like that. You got leather chest pieces. These are good for like the great axe, the stalker jacket, the electric field, the healing jackets with a lot of like what they call them is like brawlers, right? So if you're sort of more of like a swordsman, axer, or whatever, you're basically like a brawl comp in a way. So this is like life steal. So if you dive into a bunch of enemies, you pop this, and then it sort of heals you, right? So that's called the healing jacket. That's great for ZBZ if you're like a combat type. You know, this is sort of pretty cool, for like tanks and stuff like that. The Mist Cloud. This one is good for like support players. So like the Arcanes, the Damnation, the Curse, and stuff like that has Royal Jacket. So this basically re- increases attack speed by 30%, increases cooldown rate by 30% for you, and by 50% for up to 10 allies. So in a ZBZ, you sitting in the back with an pneumatic staff, and a cold staff, a locust, any of that. Use one of these. Okay, it reduces the cooldown rate for your up to 10 people by 50%. 50%. Okay, that is huge in games like these for the big battles, right? Massive. You barely ever see people use it. That's amazing if you're a support player. You know what I mean? Like, what the fuck? So then you have the boots. So these are the new ones. That's like a sort of like a teleport thing. Then you have the hunter shoes, which like give you speed, but also increase like your stun. You know what I mean? Which a lot of the tanks use these because most of the tanks use stun abilities. This sort of like increases your stun a little bit. These are shields for people using one-handed whatever's like that hollow fall. That's one-handed shield, or a taproot or something like that. And the crossbow, siege bow is probably the best for ZZ here. It does a ton of damage. Then you also have the weeping repeater, which just drops like an explosive mine. People step on it, it explodes. Just it does a ton of damage. You got the energy shaper, which is like divine edging. That does a ton of damage. But most people use siege bow, weeping for that. You know, um, then we have the war gloves, which a lot of people like using. Eh, Basically, these you just find one you like that does a bunch of damage and use. I mean, they're all basically pretty good. For this is the Grove Keeper, so this is for like tank rolls, right? You use the nurturing for slow, the E stun, the Hodge. We basically already talked about that one. This is the mace, right? So you could use one-handed mace. Let's scroll down here. You see how look, so tier 4 you only have 3 W's. Tier 5 you have 4. You know what I mean? So it's always good to level up your character. You could use here actually tier 6 you have 3 Q's rather than tier 5 with 2 of them. You know what I mean? So you always want to try to basically look for the one. So up to tier 6, and then that's when you basically have all. You have this one, which is Sacred Ground, which is like a silence. You have Air Compress for W, which is great for one-handed mace. Then your E is like a dashing leap, but you could also use Snare Charge or Guard Room. But for this type of build, you would probably use the Sacred Ground, Air Compress, and E. You know what I mean? One-handed mace. The heavy mace people used to use a lot, not so much anymore. It has E for silence, which is decent. This one was always, I always loved the Morning Star. So you have air compressed, but then you have a nasty E stun. You know what I mean? So you basically jump in, then you air compressed, and you E. It like clumps them there. For, good while, and you can do a lot of damage. Bedrock Mace is more for like territory fighting or choke fighting. It has like a straight lined E that just like it's almost like a wind wall in a way. Incubus, that's for fame farming. Camland is always good because you can, instead of using the air compress, you could use the Camland and then throw your air compress. You know what I mean? Like you throw a little thing. If it hits an enemy, then the air compress happens. But this one, it's almost like you just run into it. So like for this one, you would use Sacred Ground, Snare, and then Vendetta for throwing the air compress. Oath Keepers are probably the most underrated weapon in this damn game. Okay, but the best. So explain why here. So it has a blessed aura. So increases movement speed for up to 20 allies passing through the aura by 30%. Right? It also applies a shield that absorbs up to 1213 damage, and that's just a basic one, right? The higher tier you have, the more it'll absorb, right? So this basically isn't a in a one of those Amatic staffs, but on steroids, right? So you basically drop that E, and then like a giant wall pops up, and then up to 20 people could run through it, and a massive shield. You'll have a massive shield. This is probably the most underrated support weapon in the game. Okay, so now that's maces. I always like the maces. Oathkeeper probably the best tank weapon. For like support classes. You know what I mean? And then these are axes. You have now we already basically explained that those. So here's basically the uh, plate mount, right? So now we have soldier helmet. You have block, which is that's more of like single player type thing. But now this one is knight helmet. So basically, like you charge up and get ready to engage on the people, and then you use your displaced immunity. So it basically like gives you almost like a walking cleanse in a way. So it's harder to get stunned and stuff like that. So this is basically more for offensive, right? Then you have defensive. So Judicator helmet. So this is like a stun, which is always pretty good. And you have the chest piece. You got wind wall for knight armor. You have soldier armor, sort of for axes, but they usually use cloth or leather. You have guardian armor, which is probably most used. Um, demon armor is great because that like reflects all the damage back to the people. Judy armor is sort of for like defensive. Then you have the boots, which soldier boots are, I mean, not really many people use that. I would probably more use these if you know. These aren't bad also. The Graveguard boots, the Boots of Valor, these are like the new ones. So you have like a little charge up thing. Or for like boost speed at low HP. These are just Wanderlust. So that's like generated speed. And that's it for the skill tree. Next. Or the Destiny board. Now you press M. This is basically the map. You have the black zone way out here. You have Martlock portal over there, which is blue. You have Thetford portal here, which is like pinkish purple. You got Fort Sterling, which is the white one. Then you have Limhurst, which is green, and Bridgewatch, which is yellow. Those are basically the five different towns that have portals to the black zone. And these are like little safe zones out there. So you have more Guinness Rest, have Merlin's Rest over here. Then you have Morgana's Rest or Arthur's Rest over here. Only like they're basically mini towns out in the Black Zone. Only three of them. And then these little skull things are like fame farming, so like world bosses. All these others special little icon little. Then this Royal Continent. This is basically the towns, right? So you have Martlock. Then you just have like the little factions, right? So basically they have uh, each town has their own faction. You run around and you capture little facts and stuff. They have cool that, blah blah blah. Harley on sitting in the middle, all Bernie looking. Maybe eventually they'll make it look all pretty and nice, but you also had that basically just a bunch of the little towns, and then the towns even have stuff, right? So this is basically just like the Limhurst port, it's almost just sitting here, right? Because this is a zone in itself now. They changed that, so now each town has a basically another town. So instead of just having the three little towns out there, they now have the basically just a little portal out there too. So there's eight basically safe zones out in the black zone. You know what I mean? And then there's also the safe zones, which are towns in the world continent. And then the same thing goes here for the icons. These are like the world balls. Then these are like the zones and the little faction things. You run around and capture little faction, basically little castles gathered out all there. But you don't really get to the good stuff till you get to the black zone. You know what I mean? Which they have like huge castles, right? They got plenty of more world bosses. They have a castle in this zone, then a castle over here in this zone. You know what I mean? These are like the territories, the little squares, right? They don't have that in the world continent. They don't have terrace in the world continent. They just got these little things. I mean, these are like stashes, so safe chests out there. You know what I mean? That nobody else can get to, but then you have to go back to and get. But like out in the black zone, they have territories, right? So you get a territory like this one's a farm. You could place stuff and make, get probably higher yielded resources than you would anywhere. And these little circle things are called hideouts. Like this one is says cheer, woo. These are the little dungeons and stuff. Yeah, I mean it's decent. Like you don't really get to the good stuff until you get out in the black zone, and most of the black zone is basically already like conquered, you could say, by giant guilds, right? So you have, like Martlock, right? So you clicked it up here on the top, so you at the guild. Well, okay, let's say alliances because a bunch of guilds join an alliance, right? So like the purple, those are like arch. So you see how like a bunch of the black zone is already basically a bunch of guilds, and then as you go through it, it's like the same thing. So you have one giant guild on this side, one giant guild on that side, one giant guild on this side, on that side, and that side. You know what I mean? So it's majority, you know, sort of more pointing to like the advanced play style, right? You know what I mean? Because solo is like basic. That's like learning how to play, getting to do all that stuff. Unless you just enjoy, the corrupted dungeons with whatever. But if you want to be a little bit more advanced, you know what I mean. You then sort of it's almost like a risk board. You actually look at it like this, right? Like I know some of y'all probably played Risk before, right? So look at it like a fucking risk board, almost in a way, right? A bunch of different pieces, a bunch of different groups, a bunch of different zones, a bunch of different that people that live in that area and this area, blah 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 blah. You know what I mean? Like a damn risk board, ain't it? Uh, but you know what I mean? And then you start to get more of the advanced play style, which is like playing with others, working together as groups, getting good. You know what I mean? Establishing like the guilds or whatever. You know what I mean? This is like a stash for like the bank. So this is, the gear I would wear for like a ZVZ. It doesn't always have to be like 7.3 or 8.2. Do the flat 8 just because more other people sit there and select your abilities. This is like siphon energy, so you can overcharge. So basically, it almost like adds another tier to your level. On this little arrow, gives you the advantage item power, right? So the higher the item power in big ZVZs, you basically always want to have at least like 1400 at least, because they have this thing called the cluster queue. So if you don't have good enough per se like average item power, you then get queued out of the zone. So then you don't get to play in the battles unless you have a high enough basically item power. You know what I mean? Then this just has an explanation of all those extra stats and blah 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 blah. If you want to go into details about that, you can later. But I mean, it's and this is like a little stash. You put all your gear in a little stash spot. But like it sort of like stays. So if you stick it in this stash spot, and then travel over to Martlock or whatever, it isn't the same stuff that's in this one as it could have been in that one. It doesn't like cross across the towns. That's what they then call like a caravan, right? So then you have to caravan, which run it across from one town to another. Or because a lot like some of the towns, the prices are higher than or lower than some of the other towns. Like you might be able to go to Limhurst and make more money than selling stuff over in Thetford. You know what I mean? So then sometimes people, that's why they do a bunch of caravans. Because some of the towns have better pricing than basically some of the other ones, right? You know what I mean? Just like fucking basic taxes. You know what I mean? Some towns have higher tax rate than the other ones. Duh. Like self-explanatory here, guys. I mean, get smart and grow by playing. Simple. Ugh. But all right, that was my explanation of a little quick rundown of Albion. The Destiny board, sort of the towns, the world continent, the Black Zone. You know what I mean? I always do no map overlay because I sort of played for a while, so I sort of know more, right? And then like see how you look at it like this: the little X's over top of them, those are like battles that are gonna happen, right? So if you're bored, right, you press M, you sit here and look at the big map, then you look for the X's on the map, and it tells you when the battle's gonna be. So 2207. You know what I mean? Like, but each of them have like, so now we could prime time, right? So you see at the bottom left corner, it has the green, the blue, the purple, the red, the orange, the yellow, and the silver. So those are all different prime time. So you have 21 to 1, 18 to 22, 15 to 19, 12 to 16, 5 to 9, 3 to 7, and 0 to 4. Those are the different like timers, right? Because not every it probably would never work if it was all one timer. You know, that would just be massive chaos. So they kind of like split them into different time zones, right? So you could log on in the morning and do a ZVZ, or in the afternoon do a ZVZ, or at night and do a ZVZ. Which they call like EU or NA, right? EU is sort of more like the morning type style players. NA is more sort of like the nighttime style players. So basically, they try to like work it out for like people who have other jobs and stuff like. Then you have N for like the almost end zone mini, right? So see how M is like the big map, and you have N for like the end zone map. So if I were to click on that, it would show me the same thing as just pressing N would. You know what I mean? It just makes it easier to have different keys for different stuff. And down the bottom here, you have A for mount, Q for first ability, W for second, E for third, R is your chest piece, right? The first three abilities are for your weapon. The fourth one is for your chest piece. The fifth one, which is D, is for your helmet, and the sixth one is for your, which is F. Then you have one and two. One for your potions, one for your food. You always want to have in ZPZs either sandwiches if you get clumped and bopped a lot, gives you an extra like 500 plus HP, depending on the tier you have. 8-3 gives a lot more than flat 4 or 6 would. Then you have Gig and Resist pots. So these are Gigantify potions or resistant potions. You always want to have one of those two. We don't really use bags that much because we try to more focus on people playing in the battle rather than people just running around and trying to pick up like items like that. You know what I mean? So it just makes it a little bit easier because if they don't have a bag on, they can't pick up stuff. So it's just all pretty basic. Then they have like activities up here: Party Finder, arenas, faction, Conquer. They have challenge like weekly, monthly challenge, fancy things. You got the mailbox, which basically like sending somebody an email in game, except it's just called something different. Basically, you know what I mean? You got your inventory, you got guild management, finder, season overview. You got rankings because some people care about a rank. You know, and you have your social for your friends, just people that are on playing. Then there's a look. They even have like a gold market here, so it's how hilarious is that, right? So you have the gold market, silver market. So buy gold with silver or sell gold for silver. You know what I mean? So and then they sort of like gives you an average price, trade price. So basically like stocks, right? Next subject, premium. So now you could buy like premium, which gives you like added bonuses, right? So you could get extra um fame from fame farming because that's what they call it. So if you run around and kill mobs, you get extra fame, and then it basically helps you build on your destiny pool. Whatever a build weapon or armor that you have on, that's where the fame is going to go. So say if you want to farm for this weapon, and then you want to change it to this weapon, well, these two are basically still maces, but this one is a totally separate one on the skill tree than say this one would. You know what I mean? So if you wanted to fame this one, would fame this one 100, and then to be even better, they have seven different like say maces. We'll use maces for example. You want to fame all the maces to be able to be real good. You know what I mean? So instead of 100 out of 7, you'll be 700 out of 7. So that just adds extra item power. You know what I mean? So that's always pretty good. But like say if you wanted to then switch to this one, then you would have to start basically all over and fame again. You know what I mean? To be able to level up different stuff. That's why you basically sort of want to find out what you like, what you enjoy playing, what you want to play, and then fame that as much as you can before. then start faming something else. You know what I mean? 'Cause the better and more fame you have, the more damage you'll do, more health you'll have, more item power you'll have. And then they have like a little Albion store, which I mean, just look at that for whatever. Buy gold, basically for like money, right? You buy premium, you buy like cool little costumes. You look fancy if you want to. You know, if you're into the you know, I always try to like it like I mean the horse costumes are pretty cool, but when it comes to gear, you know, like you could have it to where you could toggle costumes off so you could actually see the gear. So like per se, like being a caller, right? It's a lot better to have the little vanity items off so that you can see basically like what everybody else is wearing. Because when you have the vanity items on, it's a little bit harder to see what they're wearing. You know what I mean? Like just me running around like this, I can tell you I'm wearing Oathkeeper's Guardian armor and then a whole set of gear. You know what I mean? If I were to have the appearance vanity items on, you know, it looks totally different. You know, so you have appearance, and then you basically could just put like just different stuff on. But then that sort of like gets in the way of being able to see and play like what everybody else is wearing. Like you could always have someone, but like see, that looks totally different than the guardian armor. You know what I mean? So say if you did have that on and you're running around, it's a lot harder to tell what somebody's wearing with that on. For like a caller perspective, it's in a way that you know what I mean. If you're just a regular player, then yeah, you know what I mean. Probably love that shit anyway. Have appearance for horses, gear. Got little emotes so you could like run around and drop cool stuff. Like you could drop that on somebody's dome after ZVZ or something. Just yeet, you know what I mean? Or like one of these cool little things, Okay, yeah, it just as for like the PvP stuff, that's like sort of like rubbing it in your face type thing. That's what those basically emotes are, where you just run around and use like these ones and just do some. We're dancing. Like taunt, like basically instead of emotes, you could almost like say taunting. For if you're sitting in there like ZVZs. You know what I mean? It's a bunch of cool. Just trying to explain it more for like the new player to where they could sort of like get good faster. You know what I mean? It's always good to be able to watch an experienced player sort of explain it a little bit better. You know what I mean? Like there are a lot of different weapons, a lot of different builds, a lot of different things that you can use, which make it a little bit harder to learn. And not everybody always has, a bunch of time to be able to invest in to figure out, easier ways to learn it. So, what easier way to learn something faster than just watch a video of someone who's, you know what I mean? Or decent. Let's say decent, right? Let's not say good because some people might get offended. You know what I mean?